Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ISO 20000-2018 webinar. We are going to be talking today about the requirements for the transition to this new version of the standard. So my name is Marta Vaquero, and I'm the Global Food Safety Certification Manager at NQA. So I'm going to try to explain you all the changes that happened from the previous standard. So let's see. All right. So let's start now. What are we going to be learning today? So I'm going to be talking about the key aspects introduced in ISO 22000-2018, also new terms and concepts, new suggestions to be considered, new requirements to be applied, transition timeline, and also how NQA can help you with this transition. First of all, just to let you know that I'm going to answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions with regard to the transition, please, you can do it now, but I only going to respond to all of them at the end, okay? Because we have to review many things. So I just want to go through all of these. Then at the end of the presentation, I will give you the feedback. And if we don't have time, I will always send an email to you. So no worries, you will get your answer. So first of all, let's talk about the origin of the ISO 20000. So ISO 20000 was created because there was a need to facilitate harmonization between different food safety regulations in the past. Also, there were several food crises that challenged the credibility of the food industry. As you may remember, for example, many people was contaminated because of the consumption of ice cream that was contaminated with salmonella. That happened in the States back in 1994. Also, for example, as you may remember as well, the mad cow disease that was spread in British herds by mid-80s, and also just to mention a few, adulteration of wines, adulteration of the mustard oil that happened in New Delhi in the past and affected like more than 200,000 people. So we need to have that in mind because that was just the beginning of the development of this standard. Also, HACCP became a legal requirement and was supported by the Regulation 852 about the food, about the hygiene of the food staff. So what happened here? HACCP became a legal requirement, but it wasn't intended to be audited and the principles certified. So this led to the release of other national standards, such as the Dutch and the Danish HACCP standards. So all of these need to facilitate the harmonization, this single framework, the response to consumer needs, led to the development of ISO 22000 back in 2005. As all other ISO standards, they need to be reviewed every 5 years. What happened here? ISO 22000 was reviewed every 5 years as is required by all these standards. So the committee conducted the review, but if they consider nothing needed to change, the standard remains the same. But it wasn't until 2014 when they decided to make some changes. So the industry was funding several food challenges, as well the release of the ISO 9001 and other standards like 14001 with a different structure, and also the ISO directive, this part one that requires a high level structure, that means an identical structure and common terms and definitions of use in the management systems, led to the revision of the publication of the ISO 22000-2018 version. That is the version that we are going to be talking about today. So the first thing that you are going to see when you read the standard is that the structure has changed. Before we had 8 clauses. Now you're going to see that the standard has 10 clauses. So you're going to see that the standard is exactly the same structure, the Annex SL structure as other ISO standards like the Quality Management System, Environmental Management System. So this is going to facilitate as well the integration between these standards. In the structure, we are going to see as well we have an introduction as well here, and we have annexes in the ISO 22000 standard. This is going to highlight just the changes on process approach by combining a risk-based thinking with the need of processes interaction. And this is going to be done throughout 2 PDCA cycles. And you are going to be thinking, what is she talking about now? So I'm talking about this. So the standard says that we need to think on risk throughout 2 PDCA cycles, or 2 Deming cycles, as you may call it. So as you see on the front of you, on the top, you have the PDCA cycle that involves all the requirements of the standard, all those requirements that you are going to be audited against, so from 4 to 10. And you can follow here the PDCA cycle through all these requirements. Then at the bottom, you will see that as part of operations, you have another PDCA cycle. So on the top, you have the PDCA cycle that refers to the organizational level. And at the bottom, you have the operational level. In this operational level, you are going to cover the HACCP principles, okay? Because it's in operations when we used to work before, when we used to look for the risks, when we used to look for all the hazards. So now the standard tells us that we need to look for risk throughout the whole management system. So that's why we need to see these PDCA cycles and we need to look for the connection between them. So our approach must change. Risk-based thinking is addressed on 2 levels, as I said, organizational and operational. So what the standard specifies here is that if you are implementing new processes or new controls or changes in your food safety management system, you need to consider risk into decision making, okay? And you need to do it throughout the whole management system. So this concept has always been implicit in ISO 22000 as part of the preventive actions implemented by HACCP, as you know. But now the standard just wants to emphasize the need to consider risk throughout the management system. So let's start talking about the different clauses of the standard. First of all, we are going to speak about scope. If you already read the new version of the standard, scope, it's basically the same information. The only thing I'm going to highlight here is that feed and animal food producers, these technical specifications has been also highlighted. So as part of those organizations to which the standard applies, now also refers to feed and animal food producers. So the technical specifications, the 22002 was 6 for feed and animal food producers, was released in 2016, replacing the publicly available specifications 222, as you may know. And this became mandatory from 2018. That's why now the standard also mentions this sector as another sector that is going to apply this new version. But the other part of the scope is exactly the same. So the section sets out the purpose of the standard, the types of organizations it is designed to apply to, and also the sections of the standard. So there is nothing new in here. With regard to clause 2, normative reference, there are no normative reference given in ISO 2000-2018. So in other words, no other normative is considered as indispensable to the application of this standard. However, if you access to our website, we have uploaded an implementation guide that is going to be very useful for you whenever you want to start implementing these changes. because here you also have this list that I included in this slide. And if you get familiar with all these ISO family standards, you will understand much better the ISO 22000 requirements. So I encourage you to go to our website, download this implementation guide, and look at these ISO family standards to understand much better all these requirements. With regard to terms and definitions, there are 45 terms and definitions. 31 are new and 3 are redefined. So there are several new terms. We are not going to be talking about all of them. So just to let you know that new terms have been introduced in this new version, but I'm just going to highlight the ones that are very important for us to understand and the ones that are very important for you as well to get familiar with their meaning. So we're going to start for the ones that have been revised. So for example, we have the critical control points. Critical control points in 2005 was defined as a step at which control can be applied and is essential to prevent or eliminate a food safety hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level. Okay, we are all familiar with this definition. Now, in the new version of the standard, the critical control point has been defined as a step in the process. This is new. Now it's specified that it's a step that must be in the process at which control measures, and this is important, and you will understand why later, are applied to prevent or reduce a significant food safety hazard to an acceptable level. Undefined critical limits and measurement enable the application of corrections. So there are new words here. It doesn't change a lot the meaning of this new definition, but there are several aspects here that I need you to get familiar with them. First of all, it's a step in the process, okay? Now it's specified that it's in the process. Also, control measures must be applied. We are talking about control measures when we identify significant food safety hazards. So the standard says that wherever you identify this significant food safety hazard through your hazard assessment, then you need to apply control measures. So for example, before we were familiar with these control points and the control measures that we used to apply to control them. So now just to these control points, you just need to apply controls. I mean, another way to call it, because control measures are only applicable to CCPs or OPRPs. Okay, and also significant food safety hazards are only now applicable to CCPs and OPRPs. And we are saying here also defined critical limits. So now it's specific now, these critical limits for the critical control points and measurement enable the application of corrections. Now, this end of the definition, you will understand this when we go through the clause 8.9. Because you really need to read the whole standard to understand some of these new definitions, okay? Now, OPRP, this has changed, I could say, a lot, and maybe some of you are not really happy with this new definition. For myself, I'm finding a little bit more confused than before, but anyway, I will try to explain what they are trying to do in here. So, OPRP in 2005 was defined as a prerequisite that was identified by the hazard analysis as essential in order to control the likelihood of introducing food safety hazards and or the contamination or proliferation of food safety hazards in the products or in the processing environment. Okay, till here, everything is okay. So we knew that was a PRP identified as essential for this control. So now the OPRP in 2018 is defined as a control measure or combination of control measures, don't panic, okay, applied to prevent or reduce a significant food safety hazard to an acceptable level. Okay, till here, we are gonna stop here. So it's not a prerequisite anymore. Now it's a control measure or combination of control measures, okay? It doesn't say that has to be in the process, can be not just in the operational process, but can be just in your system. And you need to, this needs to be controlled, of course, to reduce these significant, as I said before, significant food safety hazards are only going to be applicable now to CCPs and OPRPs to an acceptable level. Now, action criterion or action criteria and measurement or observation enable effective control of the process and or product. So here, before we had the critical limits, we were explaining the critical limits for CCPs. So we knew that at time, temperature, critical limits, so we established them so we can monitor them to avoid any kind of deviation. So now we have an action criterion. But well, what is saying here, the standard, is that this can be just observable. So there are many control measures that you're going to see that if you are going to monitor them through observations, they are not going to be CCP anymore, okay? So this is a big difference in comparison with the CCP. So think on, for example, filters, sieves. They are going to be just observable measures. So what is going to be that? That's going to be an OPRP. It's not going to be a CCP anymore, okay? All right, so let's continue here with other new definitions, redefined definitions, sorry. So we have validation, we have monitoring, and we have verification. So validation, these three have been revised, so just to explain a bit more and avoid any kind of confusion, because validation and verification has been always kind of confused by the within the organization. So validation, obtaining evidence that a control measure will be capable of effectively controlling the significant food safety hazard. So what we are doing here is an assessment of what is going to happen in the future. So we know that after doing this assessment, my system is going to work. So that's what validation means. It's a future assessment. Then we have monitoring, that is a present assessment. So it's determining the status of a system, a process, or an activity. So we are doing this assessment right now, okay? And then we have verification, that is confirmation through the provision of objective evidence that the specified requirements have been fulfilled. So as you may see here, this is an assessment that is conducted when the activity has been done already. Okay, so we are gonna do an assessment of the past to see if that actually worked. Okay, so we have validation, assessment of the future, monitoring, assessment of the present, and then verification, assessment of the past. And then we're going to be talking about these new definitions. As I said before, action criterion or action criteria, as you may see this through the standard, is a measurable or observable specifications for the monitoring of all PRPs. That's a huge difference to evaluate if it's going to be a CCP or an OPRP, okay? You just need to bear that in mind. Significant food safety hazard, a food safety hazard identified through the hazard assessment, which needs to be controlled by control measures. And we are saying that control measures are only applied when we identify the CCPs or OPRPs. And these control measures are actions or activities essential to prevent a significant food safety hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level. But what is this acceptable level? It's a level of a food safety hazard not to be exceeded in the end product provided by the organization. And what is outsource? It's make an arrangement where an external organization performs part of an organization's function or process. And probably you are thinking, and why is telling me outsource now? Well, you're gonna see this later on, and it's very important that you understand the differences between, for example, these external provided of services or external provided of processes, outsourcing, outsourced activities. Okay, so for you to understand better what the standard requires. And interested party. This is totally new for all those organizations that are only familiar with ISO 20000 and are not certified on the, for example, ISO 9001, quality management system, or environmental 14001. Interested party is a person or organization that can be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by a decision or an activity. So we are going to be talking about this later on, and I hope you will better understand what interested party means. So just to summarize this, I'm gonna speak about these differences between CCP and OPRP again. So CCP is a step in the process. OPRP is a control measure or a combination of control measures. It doesn't say that has to be in the process. It can be outside the process, but it's a control measure or combination of control measures. CCP, you can establish critical limits to monitor them, and OPRP, you will establish an action criteria. With regard to CCPs, you can apply measurement, to monitor these critical limits. With OPRP, you can apply measurement or observation, big difference. And then the CCPs will enable the application of correction, whereas the OPRP enable the effective control of the process or product. As I said before, when we go through the 8.1 clause, you will see the difference, and you will understand why they are defining now the CCP as a step in the process that enable the application of correction, whereas the OPRP is a control measure that will enable the effective control of the process or product. It's very easy to identify this through the standard. You just need to read carefully, and you just need to try to link all these definitions. So let's start now talking about all these clauses that you are going to be audited against. So when the auditor goes to your premises, they will start by this clause. So first of all, 4.1, understanding the organization's context. So this is a new requirement. It's usually conducted by top management with information about the business and activities that are gathered at every level of the organization. So this section implies an analysis of the risk or those issues that can impact your business, but not just the internal, but also the external issues that can affect the capability of the management system to get the intended results. We also must bear in mind that these issues can be positive or negative, but equally consider, to define the context. So once you define the context, you need to then establish the food safety objectives. So there are numerous methodologies to do this. So for example, you can go through the SWOT analysis by assessing the strengths and weaknesses of your organization. You will get the internal issues. If you assess the opportunities and the threats, you will get the external issues. So this is a good methodology to do it. So top management will have the SWOT analysis, will analyze every single issue that you can see here, and that you may see your organization is in all of these points. So which are your strengths, your weaknesses, the opportunities that you may have, and threats. You will analyze internal and external issues. Then another option, for example, is going through the PSL analysis. You will get all the external issues as well. You can do both, and you will get all possible external issues that may affect your management system to get the intended results. Also, through the strengths and weaknesses, you can get these internal issues that I was, as I mentioned before. So there is not a methodology that defined for you to use. These are just examples, but those will help you definitely to better determine those issues from different viewpoints. So even though documented information is not required with regard to context, this is very useful when your system is audited, and also to demonstrate your understanding and analysis of these issues. You can have, for example, meeting minutes. You can show data analysis, graphics, for example. So you will demonstrate to the auditor that you have gone through all of this and you fully understand the requirements of this clause. Okay, let's go now through 4.2, understanding interested parties. So, as I said before, customer has disappeared. We are going to be talking now about interested parties. So, once decided the interested parties, then you need to address the needs and expectations. Okay, so what you need to do here is that, for example, some needs and expectations of the interested parties are mandatory and incorporated into law and regulatory requirements. Therefore, they must be considered. So these interested parties, as I said before with the definition, they can influence the food safety management system in a positive and also in a negative way. So if you think about your organization and how can who can be affected or who can you affect with your system, you may find, for example, landlords, depending on how your organization is set, regulators, obviously, they will impact your system, definitely, customers, as well, they will be affected by your system, and also you will find, for example, employees. Definitely always consider them when you are analyzing these interested parties, and also, for example, competitors, suppliers that now we are going to consider as provider of services, also distributors, consumers, and so on. So there are different interested parties. We are not going to be talking just only about customers, because we are affecting so many other parties, and we need to consider all of them, and also we need to evaluate what do they need, what do they expect from our activities. Okay. So once we have defined these interested parties, then we need to determine the scope and then establish the food safety management system. So as you can see here, the clause 4 is sequential. So there is a need to understand the organization and context prior to identifying the interested parties and understanding their needs and expectations. The output of both allows then the determination of the scope, and then at the end designing the food safety management system. So it is sequential, okay, and you have just to start on 4.1 and then continue to all of them. Okay, so essentially, this is not a new concept, but it has been revised in order to refer to the physical and geographical site within which your operations take place. The products and services included in the food safety management system, the relevant parties you have identified, and the special characteristics, such as, for example, the type of packaging used, storage, or shelf life conditions of the products. But also don't forget that the scope statement must be maintained as documented information. Okay, this is very important because, for example, we have all this documented information. There are several documents that must be retained as part of this new version of the standard. And in this implementation guide that I mentioned before, you have a list of all the documented procedures and records that you need to have in place to show evidence that you are complying with all requirements of the standard. So this has been introduced now as part of the scope. Just the scope must be more specific to your activities, must include, as I said, this physical and geographical site, the products included in the food safety management system, all of them, okay, be very specific, and also the kind of operations that you are doing. So don't just say, like, for example, the manufacturing of olive oil. You have to go further and you have to explain a little bit more, like, for example, the refining and the packing of olive oil into glass bottles, for example. Okay. As a result of the previous clauses, then you will have to establish, implement, and maintain, and also obviously continually improve the food safety management system. These sections, the section of the 4.1 mentions the need of focusing in the interaction of processes. So all processes and their interactions included in the scope of the food safety management system must be determined and controlled in order to get intended results in accordance with the strategic direction of the organization and also the food safety policy. So that's the last part of the clause 4. Now let's move on with the clause 5. I'm gonna go a bit quicker because we have to review all the new changes in all different clauses. Okay, that's why I'm just mentioning the new just the changes. Okay, if I'm not saying something, it's because it was already in the 2005 standard. So top management. Top management in 2005 version was already including example on how leadership can be demonstrated. For example, through establishing the food safety policy, the provision of appropriate and sufficient resources, or for example, leading the management review meetings. So now in 2018 version, the standard tells us that also top management must ensure strategic plans and objectives are compatible and integrated within the organization. And also, top management must ensure the integration of the food safety management system requirements into the business processes. So these two has been now introduced in this new version of the standard. Food safety policy. So as before, the food safety policy must be approved by top management, of course. The food safety policy must be appropriate to the context and the purpose of the organization. Must provide a framework for setting and reviewing the objectives of the food safety management system. Also satisfy all applicable food safety requirements, including statutory or regulatory requirements, and also don't forget mutually agreed customer requirements with regard to food safety. Address also internal and external communication, continual improvement of the food safety management system, and ensure the competencies related to food safety. Okay, so don't forget as well, the food safety policy must be documented. So you need to have this always documented as an evidence of compliance. So top management commitment with respect to food safety management system must be visible and palpable. So a good way to demonstrate this will be, for example, having your food safety policy in the induction packs, for example, that you provide for the training to your employees, or maybe in the supplier contract or provider of services, don't call them supplier, or hanging on the notice board the food safety policy, or why not having the food safety policy in your website? So once established the food safety policy, please don't forget to communicate the food safety policy to all your interested parties. All those parties that you have previously defined, they need to know the food safety policy. It can be at demand, but this has to be available. Also, the food safety policy must be reviewed. So don't forget, top management must conduct its review and must ensure that remains applicable to the context of the organization. Also, top management is responsible for assigning roles, responsibilities, and authorities. So these roles, responsibilities, and authorities, they need to be assigned, but they also need to be understood by all employees. So this can be done, for example, through an organogram, or for example, job descriptions. We need to make sure that their duties and authorities are in there. So what we mean by responsibilities is what they are expected to do within that role. Okay, authorities, for example, is what they are allowed to do, what the limits that they have within that role. Also, there must be a nominated food safety team leader with authority to manage the system, with authority to establish, implement, maintain, and update the system when required. Also, ensure the work is managed just by training and ensuring the competencies of the team. Report on the effectiveness and suitability of the food safety management system to top management, and make continual improvements as determined by top management. Okay, in leadership, to be honest, there are not many changes, just the ones that I mentioned now. So this is going to be an easy part for you. Just make sure that you go through all these changes I have specified right now. So let's go now to talk about section 6. Section 6.1 mentions the actions to address risk and opportunities. So if you have done a thorough assessment of the context and also the interested parties and the needs and expectations, that is the 4.2, this will facilitate the identification of risk and opportunities. So here, where you are looking to answer, for example, what are you trying to achieve? For example, what can interfere to stop achieving your objectives? How can risk be turned into opportunities, or how opportunities help us to improve? So you need to answer all these questions. So you need to implement an action plan. So as I mentioned previously, ISO 22000 differentiates between two types of risk management. The one that focuses just on the operational level, as I showed to you before, and that can be controlled through the establishment and maintenance of the PRPs, OPRPs, CCPs, and also through this emergency preparedness and response. And also those risks that can affect the entire management system and also could make an impact into food safety. So two types of risk management through operational and organizational level. So your action plan definitely should include what will be done, what resources do you have to do it, who is going to be responsible, when actions will be done, and how the results will be evaluated. So you need to consider all those risks and opportunities that you have identified previously, and now it's time to have an action plan to maintain them under control, for example, in case of risk, or just to go and get them in case of opportunities. 6.2, objectives and of the food safety management system. 6.3, planning of changes. So the objectives, this has not definitely changed, but I just gonna talk to you about what is included in here. So they must be consistent with the food safety policy, they must be measurable, consistent with applicable food safety requirements, monitored and verified, communicated, maintained and updated, and obviously documented. They can be, for example, communicated through induction training and displaying them throughout your site, for example, in those notice boards. So you can use different kind of ways to communicate the food safety objectives to all your organization. So you can use, for example, the SMART term to guide you on the establishment of adequate objectives for your organization. Remember that they should be specific, they should be measurable, achievable, realistic, and timeline with a completion date established. So when there is a change in the system, your organization then must maintain the integrity of the food safety management system. So don't forget that all those changes need to be considered, and that's what the planning of changes, the 6.3 point, is telling us. Because when a change happened, then you need to conduct a revision of the system. So this was quick. The revision of the clause 6. If you have any questions, you can always do it at the end. But it's just basically going through all of these risks and opportunities that you identified before, and then implement those actions. Obviously, if you document this, could be great as well, because you will demonstrate that you have done this, and you can show all of this to the auditor. Food safety objectives, documented and always available and communicated to your staff. So Section 7, we are going to be talking here about resources. We are going to be talking about competence, awareness, communication, and all documentation of the food safety management system to ensure that it's going to be running effectively. So first of all, apart from making sure that resources are available, you need to also consider their capability and also the need for external resources. So do you have sufficient resources for the activities that you are going to be doing? So that's the first step, and then you can continue reading through all these requirements. So let's talk about people. What has changed here? So in people, now has been highlighted that you need to ensure that they are competent, including outsource. So you need to make sure that all those employees that have been hired that were through an agency, they are also competent to do the activities that you have in your organization. So you need to have documented evidence to demonstrate this, to demonstrate their competency, their responsibilities, and also the authorities assigned. Don't forget that. We have also infrastructure. So what the new version of the standard says here is that you need to consider how to provide and maintain the needs for every area. And you can do this easily, for example, having a list of all the equipment, having the resource planning, maintenance planning for the premises and also for the equipment, having as well the maintenance records. All of this will help you to demonstrate that you are also compliant with the requirements of the standard, and also obviously having an adequate infrastructure for the activities that you are going to conduct. Now, work environment. You need to ensure that you have the right atmosphere to enable the staff to operate in an effective manner. So if you have implemented in a proper manner these prerequisite programs, you are not going to have any problem with this point. Just make sure that all those prerequisites are properly implemented. And now we have two new concepts here. We have externally developed elements of the food safety management system and the control of externally provided services, products, or processes. So let's start for externally developed elements of the food safety management system. What is this? So the standard says here that we need to ensure that all externally developed devices must be adapted to the processes and also updated, must be up to date. So what the standard is asking here is that all these externally developed devices, like for example, if you have a software that has been introduced, that is in use in your organization, this must be adapted, this must be specific to your processes, okay? And this must be updated all the time. When you change any process, this has to be up to date. Also, for example, if you are talking about a consultant that developed part of your food safety management system for you, okay, just review that to make sure that everything is specific, all the documents, everything, every single record is specific to your activities. It's not just general for every single organization. Everything must be specific to your processes. And this is what the standard says here with regard to these externally developed elements of the food safety management system. So think on software, for example, think on the consultant that you have used. So then you need to have documented information that demonstrate that you are complying with this requirement. About control of externally provided services, product or processes. What the standard says here is that we need to evaluate, communicate, and also constantly monitoring all these externally provided processes, product or processes, so they will not affect the safety of the end products. So who are they, these externally provided processes? For example, provided processes, these externally provided processes, if you think about a company that may be doing your labeling or maybe doing the packaging of your finished products, you need to always evaluate, reevaluate them, in constant communication with them to explain your specifications, to make sure that they are complying with what you require, and also monitoring them to make sure that they are actually complying with what you require. For example, always when thinking about these organizations that conduct the sorting of certain raw materials for you, you need to also evaluate, communicate, and monitor this externally provided process. When we're thinking about externally provided services, some examples, for example, would be the contract cleaning that you may have for your organization, and maintenance, for example, can be done also by an external service company, the laundry in some catering businesses, or the, for example, pest control, that is usually provided by an external company. So those are the externally provided services that the standard is talking about here. So again, you need to keep documented information as evidence. So you need to keep documented information of those companies that are conducting part of your processes, part of the services for your organization, and also evidence that you are evaluating them, that you kept in contact with them, and you are also monitoring them to make sure that they are complying with your requirements. With regard to competence, not only personnel within your organization, but also external providers, as we said, as we used to call them suppliers, need to be competent for their activities. So you need to ensure that they are actually all competent. So personnel controlling critical operations as well. So for example, if you have assigned someone to monitor those CCPs, make sure that they are competent to do so. Make sure that you have something to demonstrate that they have been trained properly and they are competent to do that activity. With regard to awareness, the standard says here what personnel needs to be aware of. So for example, with regard to policy, also regarding objectives. So also, you think on this point, for example, would be very useful their contribution to the food safety management system, including the benefits of their improved performance. Okay, so that's very important as well. So there are not many changes, but just to highlight this. With regard to communication, this information is mostly the same information that you had before. There are only changes with regard to some terms. So for example, qualifications has been now replaced by competencies, that is the ability to apply knowledge and skills. And also suppliers, as I mentioned, has been now replaced by external providers. Undocumented information, same thing. So this hasn't changed. The only thing that has been included here is the need of having documented information and requirements required by law and customers. So you need to have all these requirements by law and the applicable legislation and the customer requirements, all of them must be now retained as documented information. Okay, so now we have gone through all the section 7. Let's start now talking about section 8. That is the section that I suppose everyone loves. If you love food safety, you love this section. So 8.1, operational planning and control. In here, what you're going to see is that all your planned activities now they need to be in place, and you need to have documented evidence to demonstrate that you act as planned. Okay, so this is a common requirement. Only operational planning and control is going to be exactly the same for all other standards, like for example ISO 9001, ISO 14001. All of them contain this clause requirement, operational planning and control, with exactly the same information. From here to section 9 is just specific to ISO 22000, and is where we are going to find most of the HACCP requirements. As you may see as well, the standard doesn't really talk about HACCP that much, so we are kind of losing HACCP as well. HACCP is only mentioned here, like I think once or twice in the new version of the standard. So as you may see when you read the standard, of if you have read it already, it's just about focusing on risks. Okay, so 8.1, go back to this point. So we need to ensure that all requirements are understood. So we need to establish the criteria for processes. We need to implement controls, and we need to determine the ability to comply with these requirements. So this clause is specific. Is not a specific, sorry, is just common to all other standards that follow the Annex SL structure. Now, let's continue with 8.2. This is specific, as I said, to ISO 22000. In this clause, the standard says that we need to ensure statutory and regulatory requirements are considered now when selecting and also establishing the prerequisite programs. So you need to ensure that you are also considering all the applicable legislation to your activities. Also, the standard suggests here the use of the technical specifications 22002 series. So before, the standard just mentioned the availability of these technical specifications, but now it's just suggesting the use. So it's not mandatory to use them, but it's suggested. So just make sure that you are applying these technical specifications, or at least that you are considering them when you are establishing all your prerequisite program. So for example, we have now 5 ISO technical specifications. We have for catering, we have for farming, we have also for manufacturing, for retail, and we have also now for feed and food producers. So if you are within one of these sectors, just make sure that you get the proper technical specifications applicable to your sector, and review all the prerequisites that are considered for your business. Also, new aspects shall be considered here when establishing the prerequisite programs. So you need to consider, apart from the ones that we are familiar with, for example, the layout and all the distribution, you need to now consider receiving incoming materials, the storage, dispatch, transportation and handling, and also product information and consumer awareness, labeling. So you need to add these two when establishing the PRPS. Traceability system, what the standard says here. So it doesn't say many things if we compare both versions of the standard. There is only one thing that is quite relevant now. So further aspects has to be considered. For example, the relation of lots of received materials, ingredients, and intermediate products to the end products, and also reworking of materials products. So this has to be part of the traceability exercise. And you need to ensure also the applicable legal and customer requirements are identified, and you need to maintain the records for this traceability system. And the standard says that shall not be less than the shelf life of the products provided. And effectiveness shall also be checked. So you need to do kind of a mock traceability exercise, okay? So this has to be tested to make sure that we are able to do the traceability in a proper manner if something happens in the future. Emergency preparedness and response. Now the standard provides you with some steps to handle the emergencies, and also the standard says that you need to test to verify the effectiveness of the procedure that you need to have in place. So you have to test emergency preparedness and response. So for example, in case of fire, in case of flood, you need to test to see how you can ensure that your products are still safe. But also for the case of traceability, in case that the results are from the analysis, they came positive for something, you need to recall it, and you need to have a traceability system in place that must be checked. So both of them need to be now tested. So there are new requirements in this section 8.5. So we are going to go through all of them and just highlighting the changes. Okay, if I'm not saying nothing else, is because the other information was already available in 2005 version. So for example, characteristics of raw materials, ingredients, and product contact materials. So now you need to also include the source of products, So if they are coming from animals, are they coming from vegetables, from minerals? So you need to define that. Characteristics of end products. Apart from example from the method of distribution, you need to have the method of delivery. Now that has been included in this new version of the standard as well. Description of the processes and process environment. Is now specified all descriptions that must be documented, including the process environment. So it's easier now for you to go through the standard and go through all these new descriptions that are included and you need to have documented. Flow diagrams in more detail. So we have now processing aids, packaging, and utilities must be included in the flow diagram. So apart from the other points, like the critical points that we need to have before, don't forget now to include packaging and utilities when they enter to the flow. Hazard identification in relation to type of product, process, and process environment. So now, the standard what says here is that you need to be much more specific than you were before. So for example, if you go to a storage control, the storage step, and you have chill products in there, you cannot say like a biological hazard could be just the growth of pathogens. You need to specify what kind of pathogens, what can grow in there. Depending on the kind of products that you have, you need to do a thorough assessment, okay? So you can take this information from your employees, from the expertise of your employees, and also based on your customer requirements, okay? So all these hazards assessments now needs to be very thorough, okay? Selection of control measures. You need to bear in mind also that you need to have the viability of measurable critical limits and corrections in case of failure. And you need to also consider external requirements that may affect the selection of the control measures because they need to be maintained as documented information. Okay, so these two requirements has been now included in this point of the standard. Prior to the hazard control point, you need to validate the control measures to control all significant hazards. And now you are asking yourself, but what is this hazard control plan? What is that? I never saw that before. Well, before you were familiar with hazard plan. Now there is a new point in here, 854, that specifies that apart from the hazard plan and the monitoring system for the CCPs, you need to have the OPRP plan and the monitoring systems for OPRPs, for those operational PRPs, those control measures of combinational control measures, don't forget that. and both of them must be documented. So once you have defined, if you had, so once you have identified, sorry, if you have CCPs and also probably OPRPs, then you need to have a HACCP plan, but also an OPRP plan, okay? And both of them are gonna be part of the hazard control plan. 8.6 is telling us that we need to ensure that all information is up to date. So what is saying here, this point of the standard is that all information related to the characteristics of raw materials, ingredients, and products contact materials, also the characteristics of end products, also the intended use, and the flow diagrams, all of them must be updated when required. Okay? If there is any change, then the hazard control plan and also the PRPs, they must be also revised and updated. 8.7, the control of monitoring and measuring. So the software that we are using for monitoring and measuring needs validation. Do you remember when we were talking about externally developed elements? So this software, as we mentioned before, needs to be validated, needs to be specific to our, needs to be adjusted to our activities, needs to be updated at all times, okay? 8.8, verification related to PRPs and the hazard control plan. We need to confirm the effectiveness of the PRPs and the hazard control plan. We need to also have the verification and the monitoring of the activities or control measures by different personnel. What this means is that if you have one person that is monitoring the CCPs, the same person cannot do the verification of the CCPs, okay? So different personnel must be doing verification and monitoring of these activities or control measures. And this has been highlighted here in 8.8. Also, the control of products and processes nonconformities. So corrective actions from consumer complaints and regulatory need to be also considered. So if you have a nonconformity log, bear in mind as well that you need to include the consumer complaints and regulatory complaints in that nonconformity log. So do you remember when we were talking about the CCPs and the OPRPs? We were saying that the critical limits, they enable those steps in the process, they enable corrections, whereas the OPRPs, they enable the control of the product on processes. So in 8.9, the standard says here that you need to really retain all these products that are exceeding these critical limits for CCPs or action criteria for OPRPs. You need to retain the products until the evaluation and disposition has been decided. So here, when you exceed a CCP in 8.94, when the critical limit is exceeded, the standard says that you need to consider that product as potentially unsafe products. So now you have three options for this. You can reprocess the product, so the food safety hazard is reduced to an acceptable level. You can use it for another use. You can give it another use, just making sure that it's not going to jeopardize food safety in the food chains, or just destroy this product. Okay, so there are just these three options. You cannot do anything else. Critical limits exceeded, potentially unsafe products, retain the product. Three options: reprocess until it's secure, destroy the product, or give it another use, making always sure that it's not going to jeopardize food safety in the food chain. But with regard to action criteria, if we are exceeding that action criteria that we said that can be observable, then we need to determine the consequence of that failure with respect to food safety. We need to determine the causes of the failure, and we need to identify the affected products and conduct the release evaluation. So here the standard is a bit more open okay, to another kind of evaluation. So it's not that strict that with the critical limits. So with the action criteria, you need to determine consequences, the cost, and also identify the affected products and conduct the release evaluation. Now, after doing all of this, the non-conforming products won't be released unless all established monitoring activities demonstrate that control measures were effective, or combined effect of control measures make the product suitable, or other verification activities can demonstrate the products conform to acceptable levels for the specific food safety hazard. Okay, so you have different kind of ways to demonstrate that the product is still safe. Whereas when you are exceeding the critical limits for CCPs, no way. You need to just reprocess the product, destroy it, or give it another use. For action criteria, well, you can actually demonstrate that the product is still safe if you conduct this kind of assessment, but always making sure all of this is documented. That's why I explained before that CCPs, they enable corrections, as I said before, reprocessing, destruction, or other use, whereas the OPRPs, they enable the control of the product or processes, okay? Because we are gonna make sure that the product is safe. We are gonna evaluate everything we can to make sure that we are that we can guarantee that the product is safe for the consumption or for the use, okay? So I hope that you understand much better now the definition of CCPs and OPRPs. After going through that revision of the 8.9. So we have now finished with section 8. We are gonna be talking now about section 9 and 10. I'm gonna be a bit quicker because we are a bit over the time established for this webinar. So 9.1 regarding monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation. So what shall be determined in here? So this is a new requirement of the standard. So you just need to highlight here what needs to be monitored and measured, how it is monitored, measured, analyzed, and evaluated, when are these activities conducted, when the results shall be analyzed and evaluated, and who shall analyze and evaluate them. Okay, so you need to have all of this implemented and in place in order to comply with 9.1. So documented information must be retained, and performance and effectiveness of the food safety management system shall be also evaluated. So these are the changes introduced in performance evaluation. 9.2, internal audits. You just need to make sure here that your audit program covers changes in the food safety management system. This was not included before in 2005. And also the results of monitoring, measurement, and the previous audits. So make sure that the audit program covers all those. Results as well, they need to be reported to the food safety team and top management. And you need to determine if the food safety management system meets the intent of the food safety policy and objectives through these internal audits. With regard to management review, well, I'm not going to be saying anything about outputs because it's exactly the same as 2005 version, but in inputs, you have several things that have changed here. So for example, you need to also consider the changes in internal and external issues that may affect the food safety management system. This is a new part of a new requirement of the standard. So obviously this needs to be now discussed as part of the management review meeting. Also, information of the performance and effectiveness of the food safety management system, including trends in review of identifying risks and opportunities, and effectiveness of those actions that you have taken to address them, the performance of providers of services, processes, or products that we were mentioning before. Remember those pest control companies. Remember as well that company that carries out the packaging for us. Non-conformities and corrective actions need to be discussed as well here, monitoring and measuring results, and whether the objectives have been achieved. Also, the adequacy of resources that we have to conduct our activities and the opportunities that we have for continual improvement. All of this has been now included as part of the inputs for the management review meetings. And we are now in the last requirement, the last clause of the standard, section 10, improvement. So we have a new requirement that is 10.1, but to be honest, here you just have information of what you need to do when a non-conformity occurs. So just gives you some of the steps that you need to follow when a non-conformity occurs in your organization. So it's quite handy. In 10.2, continual improvement, there are no significant changes here. It's just highlighted the importance of improving the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the food safety management system. So if you consider, if all the previous sections are established and implemented, as well as the food safety management system updated, then continual improvement will happen. Okay, that's what it's saying here. And then the last clause of the standard, 10.3, updating the food safety management system. This hasn't changed at all. So what the standard says here, just to summarize, is that top management must provide resources and the food safety team leader must evaluate the food safety management system at planned intervals, and also must maintain these updates as documented information and discuss them during these management review meetings. But in 10.3, nothing has really changed if we look at the previous version of the standard 2005. So this is the transition timeline. As I specified when I be talking about the release of the standard, the standard was published on the 19th of June 2018, last year. But the committee started doing this revision of the standard back in 2014. So now most of the certification bodies are accredited to go for this transition. NQAs are accredited now. So we are encouraging now our clients to go for this transition. Okay, we have uploaded implementation guides and also gap guides on our website to help you with this transition. We are not going to accept any other audit for ISO 22000, 2005 in July 2020. So from next year, we are not going to be accepting more ISO 22000, 2005 audits. Only 2018 audits are going to be scheduled. So the transition period ends in June 2021. So make sure that you have done all these changes before then. So how can we help you? So ISO 22000, 2018 can be, we can help you with this transition through gap analysis. So for example, what we are doing with our clients, we provide a gap analysis just before this transition audit. They will need to complete this gap analysis and they will just need to go through every single requirement of the standard, making sure that they have implemented all these new changes. So when the auditor goes there, just need to verify the adequate implementation of the changes. Okay, that just need to verify that all of them have been established in a proper manner. And evidence, of course, will be checked for that. So there is a TR006 transition gap analysis that's also available on our website. There is a gap guide that tells you the differences between the 2005 version and also the 2018 version. An implementation guide that talks to you about every single requirement of the standard and how can you implement all these changes. Also, we can do a pre-assessment by demand. So we are actually doing the transitions at surveillance or recertifications, just depending on how are you within the certification cycle. But if you require a pre-assessment, we can also do that for you. We are also providing these webinars with the changes, and there is also a section for news at our website that you can also check and see if we have new information about this transition. Right now, we have a lot of information about ISO 20000 2018. So please go to our website and check it, because it's going to be very useful for you. And you can always contact us if you need more information. So now all this presentation, and then also the implementation guide and gap guide will be sent to you by the training team. So you will get this information after this webinar. Also, there is a test that will be available for you just in case you need a certificate of attendance for this webinar. So if you have any question or something, you can always send it to us at info@nqa.com. Anyway, I'm gonna be checking now if you have any question. All right. I cannot see any question now, so I hope you all understood all the new changes of the standard. And thank you so much for attending today to our webinar. I hope you all get the transition done very quickly. Thank you so much. Thank you.